All right. Welcome to Goddess Vibrations, the spiritual sexual empowerment show. I am here with Mike Watts today. I wanted to have him on because he's doing this really amazing podcast. Tell me the name of it, the exact name, Mike, because I'll mess it up.
Called State of Men.
The State of Men, the State of Men, talking about the experience of masculinity in modern times. And I would love to dive more into that topic today. If you haven't been here before, I'm Natasha Edwina. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. My background is relationships. And then I went to school to get a PhD in psychoneuroimmunology, mind-body medicine. And there I started to do dissertation work on spirituality, sexuality, and got really interested in that topic. And your mother-in-law, Mike, has been a big influence on my work because obviously being an OBGYN and talking a lot about femininity and feminism, I should say, and how that intersects with sexuality and women's health and all of that. And I met you, gosh, a while back. It's been a while since we've been face to face. So I appreciate you coming and taking the time to do this. I know you're a dad now and you've got 2 little ones and a busy life. And you were just, I think you had just gotten married. You and Kate had just gotten married when I met you, and I was just ending my marriage. So I think about you guys.
Yes, I remember that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think about you guys a lot because I know how hard that 30-something married with kids phase of life is. It's very challenging. There's a lot of stress. There's a lot to adjust to. And I think just from the outside looking in, you guys have been through a lot in the last few years on top of that. And you seem to be navigating it pretty admirably. So wanted to put that out there too.
Thanks.
And I know you, I know you as, I know you have an engineering background. You're kind of like a systems solution guy, consultant. I just see you as a very competent person. You know, we're talking about masculinity. You're kind of like that stereotypical masculine in that way. And yet you're a very compassionate and sensitive man from my experience as well, and have a great sense of humor. So I want to put that out there as how I see you and what I appreciate about you, and the things that made me want to have you come on today. But you go ahead and introduce yourself, because we all have 50 different ways that we could introduce ourselves, but what's your favorite right now?
I mean, what you said is pretty good, so we can just stick with that. But I appreciate that. Thanks for having me on, and that's great. So I live in Miami, and I have a wife that we've been together for a decade now. Wow. And then we have 2 kids. We have a 6-year-old girl and a 3.5-year-old girl. So we just recently moved here from Maine. For about 10 years, Kate and I ran a business together. So, and that evolved from a network marketing company, and which is how we ended up meeting, and then into kind of online educational company for women entrepreneurs and business owners. And I ran the back end operations from that. Before that, I had many different lives with many different industries and different jobs. I think I have like 20 jobs. I've lived in, I think in 20 years, I've moved, or 21, 22 years now, I've moved like 24 times. So been all over the United States and lived everywhere. But yeah, so, and just like an adventurer, like I like adventure. I like doing things that's against the grain. I don't like following the norm of humanity and the direction people are going, or the world, I guess. Sorry, say that again.
We have that in common, so that's good.
Yeah. So I feel like a lot of us feel that way, but then we get stuck in this path, right? Of what's safety, because a lot of it comes from fear and safety and stuff like that. But yeah, I've always been, there's an element of me that requires safety, but a lot of it goes against the grain of what's existent. So, but I grew up in Indiana, and then after that, I kind of lived all over the United States, then ended up in Maine for almost 10 years. And then now we just recently relocated to Miami, Florida. And then I left our company on the day-to-day operations standpoint, I still manage our finances and work with Kate on planning sometimes.
Mhm.
But day-to-day operations, she's been running the show from there. And then I started the podcast with a friend of mine named Aiden Dowling. So we have a cis man, myself, and a trans man, Aiden, that is sharing this podcast platform together, talking about masculinity and modern manhood that we're going through. And also I'm doing business consulting and coaching for small business owners who are overwhelmed and looking for solutions, creating plans and systems to allow themselves more freedom.
Mhm.
So that is a little bit about how I ended up here.
Amazing. That's a lot. And I, as you were talking and I was listening, I had like Facebook posts that you've written or stories that you've told kind of pop up in my memory of the little pieces of those um, life experiences that came up. And I think of like, you and Kate taking your cross country trip that,
Road trip. Yeah.
yeah, that had you, I guess, basically falling in love and
That's what it was. Yeah.
yeah, beginning to do business together. And, I remember your story about, you used to work for a cigarette company and
Yep.
how you completely did a 180 by doing business, with them and then going to a health supplement company and even stopped smoking weed and all of this stuff and how, like how that transformed your body, your mind, all of that stuff and how you came to that decision. And yeah, just all of this, all of these like powerful posts that you've written, and I see that as you and Kate having that in common. She's an amazing writer, and I just see you both as very authentic and genuine, and it feels like people can really connect with your stories because you are so authentic and genuine and inspiring, and not hiding it when you've been through struggles or you're going through stuff. And um, and so, yeah, this topic of masculinity, what is masculinity like? What are you and Aiden coming up with on your podcast as your kind of ahas and awarenesses? I know I love having a podcast. I love having this YouTube show. It's supposed to be just a little private or a passion project during the pandemic to keep myself busy, but it's now we're in season 2. I don't know how many episodes we've had now. It's been so much fun, and it's been so nourishing for me to have these really high level or conversations and then come with these awarenesses. So I don't know if that's what you're experiencing over there, but I feel like just having these conversations is helping, and then publishing them, for people to listen to what might resonate for
Hmm.
them. So curious about what your ahas have been, what your awarenesses have been around masculinity in this modern day weird world.
Yeah, a lot. I mean, so I think one of the biggest realizations for me has been just because I was partnered with Kate in business and in life. So one of the most challenging things why working with your wife is working with your wife, like, and then trying to figure out, there's a lot of polarity conversation that happens between a man and a woman or whatever, or woman, man partnerships, right? Just partners with people, right? It's like attracting each other to each other. But when you're in the constant dialogue of business a lot, and like that's our common theme between us, that can kind of separate itself. And then you throw 2 kids on top of that, and you like try to like, and then I got really sick over the past few years. It's really challenging, like to be there. So I think when I started this podcast, it was really about who am I? Like, how do I fit in this world myself? And because there was an identity ego check, call it what you will. Like, it was my ego. It was getting in the way of this dynamic between Kate and I, and then her ego in a different format. And then we were living close to her family. So you throw her family on top of that, and it adds a little bit more complications to the whole situation, just part of life. Right. But I think for me, starting this podcast for sure was about like, what am I here to do now? And how do I show up as a dude in this life? Because there's a lot of variations of what men are supposed to be. So if we look at like the last two presidents that were elected in the United States, I mean, we can go farther back, but like the last two are great examples where you have one of them that was very like, take Trump, that was very confronting to everybody and it's in your face. You know where he stands, right? And then you have another dude, Joe Biden, who it's kind of like Mr. Sly Man, where you don't really know what he stands, but he does behind the scenes. And it's like, that's who we were electing as leaders in this transformational place that we exist in the world. And it's like, this is what we got, right? And then it's two dudes that look like me, right, that are up there speaking, which it does not necessarily represent the United States, or it does not represent the United States of America, how we are, because we're electing these two guys that look like us. And we thought with Barack being elected, it's like it created a transformational leadership taking place and we're representing the United States. And it's like, no, we went from that to completely toxic, right? And so say where you are on the spectrum, like, I don't really care, like, just do what you want, right? But like, recognize what's happening. And I think that's the biggest piece for me. So when I started the State of Men, I would look around to these men groups, and you have men groups that associate with all three of those dynamics that I just explained. And then you have other side where like it comes to gender. And so people would be like, you have to be born a man to be a man. And like Aiden was not that, right? So he transitioned when he was like 21, I believe, right around that age. And so realizing when him and I started hanging out, there's very little differences between the two of us as men, right? And so I think that was a big realization when we started becoming friends and wanted to bring, I think we're the world's first of a cis man and trans man podcast together. Like, I don't think it exists. We haven't found it. Yeah. So I can say the world's first, right? But that also adds another dynamic, because that's another partnership that I left one and then I joined another one immediately. Right. And so it's been this place of us actually telling our story, realizing it's very similar, talking about stuff that goes on in the world, and just really learning what, like, I never thought about masculinity ever until this podcast, right? Aiden would always, when we were studying, planning it out, he'd be like, okay, let's talk about masculinity. We're going to do masculinity. I was like, what the fuck is that? Like, I don't know. Like, it's not something I've ever thought about. And so we've been thinking about what that looks like, and how it's really like the podcast is for how I show up in the world. Like, that's how it is. And we're just dialoguing our own journey. And if people listen, they listen. If they don't, they don't. But if we get 0 episode downloads, or we get 100 or 1,000, like, to me at this point, I don't really care. It's just for, of course, the business person inside of me. It's like, yeah, growth, go. But the reality is it's consistent practice over time that's allowing us to talk about these subjects that are creating a better platform for myself to really determine who I am and what I'm here to do. So that's what, and we've learned a lot throughout that process. Like, even as a trans person, as Aiden is, and then myself, like, as I said, like, there's not a lot of differences between the two of us. And I feel like it's been a big learning for both of us to recognize we have similar fears or insecurities of what that looks like. And we can live in this world together as somebody desires to live. Right. Like, so I think that's been a big eye-opening experience for me. And it's like given me a lot more compassion for people as they're navigating this environment of the world.
Yeah, there's a lot of gems in that, what you just said. I'll start with the podcast and your mission in the consistency. I feel the same way with this one. It's like, these are conversations that can be really healing, and probably the majority of the world maybe isn't ready for them yet, but you have a content library that you're building, and you can always go back to that, right? And share that and be like, we were talking about that 5 years ago, or whatever else. And I guess you're right. I have not seen a podcast, with a transgender and cis man together. So that's well done. That's really beautiful. And attached to that, I will say one thing I've noticed about you that is really admirable is you are a white cis man talking about social justice issues and being sensitive to those issues in a way that is very assertive and very vocal without shouting over the folks that you're supporting, if that makes sense. I feel like that's an
Mhm.
art. I feel like that really is an art to be able to do that. And I'm speaking this as a white woman as well, to make sure that, you know, in my passion for social justice and my passion to be an advocate, that I'm not speaking over the folks that I'm wanting to give the mic to, I guess. Um,
Mm.
and so I see that in you, and I think that's admirable, because it's not about other groups being silent. I don't think that's the answer. And I think that all of us, you know, have a nervous system, and we've all been through hardship, and we've all been through hard times. And so we do have to be compassionate um, to understanding that, you know, and understanding that as we have these conversations, it's impacting all of us, even if we
Mhm.
weren't, even if we were the historic group of the oppressor or whatever else. I have my son was talking about some of this social justice stuff and the other day, and it was really interesting getting his perspective as an 11-year-old who doesn't know much of the horrible history of this country, but he's experiencing the divisiveness and trying to make sense of where it's coming from, that kind of thing, you know. And that being said, too, I used to work, I don't think you know this about me, but I used to work in the public school system, and I worked quite a bit with transgender teens that were transitioning. And that what you said, compassion, you know, the amount of compassion for some of the way the world perceives that sort of thing. And you mentioned some of the political stuff, and it's kind of gone backwards. I was doing an advocate for this for teenagers back in like 2009 to 2010, and the law under the Obama administration was getting better for transgender folks and more protections, and it was looking up. And I really truly believe, after meeting with several of these kids daily, weekly in a day treatment school, that um, what a beautiful perspective they have of femininity and masculinity, of women's issues and men's issues, having lived in both, you know, lived in both bodies in a way that at least society perceives them, because the way society perceives us and treats us is different, but depending on how we look, right, and what they think we are. So I love that perspective, and I feel like it's a perspective that really ought to be listened to more often. And just, you know, listening to I always ask questions of my transgender friends too. I'm just curious about how things have been different for them
Mhm.
than myself. So I really appreciate you putting that out there. And so you're saying, though, that you've you're more similar, your experience of masculinity has been more similar than different between
Yep.
you and Aiden. Okay.
Yeah.
And so how do you feel that that maybe generalizes or is indicative of the collective experience of masculinity going on right now? What do you think is up for masculine partners or men?
I don't know. Like, I don't know. Men have, like, it's a hard road as a man to be vulnerable and express your feelings, because like as we grow up from little boys to get older, we are told to be quiet. You know, we're called things. We're not allowed to cry. You know, and a lot of that is geared towards, we're being told, like, don't be a pussy, or don't, you know, crying's for girls. There's no crying in baseball. There's none of this shit, right? So I think we have to have a serious, like, what's normal are coaches screaming at kids and adult players, right? Like, even what's normal in coaching teams are coaches screaming at players. And it's just like, why is this normalized, right? Like, why are the kindness and compassion, and it's like allowing your feelings, or like the soft skills, are not actually being celebrated in this way? Or, you know, I don't know, like, these are just things I ponder on. And but we also grew up where a couple generations ago we're going to war all the time, right? Like, these people are just now, you know, it's like they're coming to the end of their life, or they've already passed away, where they grew up in a society where you were 16, 17 years old and you're shipped off to go shoot people. There's wars happening right now, right? That's still happening today. So when you're brainwashed, let's just call it what it is, at the age of 17, 18 years old, that you have to go to another country because that's an enemy, then no wonder why we have problems of men being, now I know, there's women now in military, but that wasn't always the case. Right. And so there's no wonder why there's a problem, right? It's like, and these people are celebrated as heroes in this way. And so we celebrate these type of people for situations. Now, I don't want to have a debate, military, all that stuff, but like, that's the facts, right? That's just the way it is. And so that is what we're looking at, is a good role model of a dude, right? As a man. And I think it's just we're at a transition. And I think as a man was heralded as the breadwinner, right? And so as still happening in the world around that we exist in, is that women just weren't given the same amount of rights, right? They couldn't even get their own bank accounts without a man's approval. Like the patriarchal system that has been operating for a really long time is hurting everyone. It's hurting myself as a dude. It's hurting you as a woman. Like, it's hurting all of us at the same time. But we think it's about not being man enough, or not being tough enough, or too soft, and so it's just like, as a guy, like, I'm on my journey and experience, and I have to work on my shit. Like, I have to work on my vulnerabilities and what I'm going through. And I think as men start to do that, we'll start opening it up, or the world will start to become a better place, and it's my job as a dude to help other men do that, right? It's not your job. It's not Natasha's job to educate men and help men and take care of men. Like, no, that's not your job, right? Like, it's my job as a dude to help other dudes. And it's not my job to take care of Natasha and help Natasha, right? It's like having compassion, but not educate you on, well, women's rights, here it is. It's like, no, that's not, like, it's for me to just live my life in the world that I desire to live in and want to be in, and realize, like, not everybody has the same starting place as we begin, right, in the world. And so I think as I'm growing and becoming a better human, like you gave me some praise a little bit ago, which I thank you, about coming at it with rational thought. And I don't think I actually do that, to tell you the truth. I think it's actually really hard, because it's also, I've had to stop, like, I guess you could say, mansplaining, or thinking my opinion is always the right one in that way. And this was done unconsciously. It wasn't stuff I did consciously. And Aiden and I have a lot of conversations about that. Like, we hold each other's, we correct each other on our stuff. And Kate's done this for me as a husband. And one of the hardest things is also expressing my needs to her as my wife, and all her sensors of safety and security shoot up. Be like, what's going on with my husband? Why isn't he there? And it's like, no, I actually am expressing vulnerability. And I think Brene Brown is the best person in the world to follow around all these things, because she explains it from both sides. And I think it's very helpful, for this. And it's just like listening to other people's stories and what they're going through, to realize, like, my story is not the same as somebody else's. And so it's to realize, like, I'm not aware, even with the Kyle Rittenhouse case that just came out a couple weeks ago, it was really fascinating, because my Instagram had two different narratives at the same time. Like, on one, it was like, Kyle's free, he's amazing, right? And then the other side was like, he should be in jail, and I can't believe this, and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I thought he killed two Black people. Like, I really did. Right. So I started diving deep after the verdict came out, and I started watching all of the videos, everything I could find my hands on. I started dissecting this myself to get my own opinion on it. But I'm like, why are we this guy's being heralded as like a hero? And I'm like, he's a 17-year-old boy that felt like he needed to go. Like, why pick up a gun and go to this place? Like, why is that the first instinct for a 17-year-old gun? And so I just like think about that. And then I think about, like, the pain that this dude probably in, and he has to carry this. Like, he's not a hero. Like, he didn't do any, like, right. And then I think about all the people that also were there and what that was like. And so just like putting we're all humans on this journey. And we were born and we're going to die. Like that's two facts that we can live with for the rest of our lives. So it's like, how do I make it more comfortable for those other people that are on there, and how we do that to solve like masculinity or man? I don't really know. Like, I don't know. I'm just trying to like figure that out myself. But I know what we've done up to this point is not the solution, or else it would have worked. Right. So it's like the world is changing. Where we are right now, everything is changing. Everything. And it's really exciting. I don't find there's some stuff that's depressing that's going on right now in 2021, at the end of this as we're recording. But like it's also really exciting because like where we could go in 10 years could be remarkable, as long as the robot dogs don't take us all out, you know?
They say the robots are breeding now. I'm like, what? I'm not up on my,
Oh, that's wild, right?
yeah, like I don't know what's happening there. Gosh, so many points that were fascinating that you brought up. I mean, as far as the possibilities right now for transformation, innovation, I'm glad that you're sticking to that optimistic viewpoint. I try to stay there. Some days I dip, I dip
Yeah,
because there's a
of
lot
course.
happening. But I will say well, Carl Rogers called that persons of tomorrow, people who could look into chaos and actually come at it from a different consciousness and create innovation and something totally new. And so he was studying people like Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. and these folks that had a totally different way of handling a problem, and how they were such change makers to elevate humanity and evolution forward. And he was a psychologist that was known for unconditional positive regard. So he felt like if he just unconditionally loved his client, his patient, that would naturally start to heal them, if even if he did nothing else, if he could just
Hmm.
accept them and let them be. So that's what he was known for. But he was really fascinated in these persons of tomorrow, which I learned about in 2013 when I went to, actually it was right between my about to start my PhD, and I learned the professor, or not professor, um, the oh gosh, president emeritus. I'm like a mental block with that with that word because
Yeah.
it has been traumatic the last 8 years, probably. President emeritus of my university, at Saybrook University, where I was getting my PhD, which I have not finished. I'll just put that out there in case it's unclear. I'm on break, pandemic break. Um, she was saying that she worked with Carl Rogers for 20 years, and so she was very intimate with his work. And back in 2013, actually this might have, yeah, early 2013, she said he predicted already, in the 70s, that we were going through this massive global transformation, and it was
Mhm.
only going to get bigger and bigger. And I could feel it. She's like, right now it's like there's this big turning point, especially politically. And now, if we look at the difference between 2013 and 2021, whoa, right? It's like more intensity each year. But these psychologists that are looking at social systems and the big, big picture, which I know you and I can both identify. I think, aren't you INTJ as well? I know
No,
no, you're not. Okay. What's your Myers-Briggs? Do you know? I'm just curious.
I don't remember. It's E
Okay.
though. It starts with E,
Okay.
like
Oh, that makes sense. You would
ENTJ.
definitely be an E.
Kate's ENTJ.
Oh, is she
I forget.
really?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. I
Yeah.
didn't, well, that makes sense. Her planet
Maybe.
and all
I
this.
don't know. I could be completely wrong.
Okay. Yeah. I
I'm
make
not an I. I'm an E. I know
Okay.
that.
Well,
Yeah.
ENTJ is an entrepreneur for sure too. So, but anyway, you're a systems guy. I know you can identify with the bigger perspective or whatnot. So these psychologists have been noticing social changes for a long time and predicting all of this. And they said, when crisis hits, there's a group that will cling to the conservative. They'll cling to the old way.
Yep.
That is what keeps us from really coming forward to solutions. And I feel like we're still in this, this gridlock. And then now we have this world crisis of a pandemic, and people are clinging even more. But some people are starting to shake loose and break free and surrender. And that's the place that we need to go into to start to do the healing. And as that as that relates to masculinity, let's say, and what you talked about is vulnerability, and you brought up wars, there are intergenerational traumas from war
Mhm.
that are impacting us, you and I,
Yep.
and everybody else, because it was a world war. Again, like a pandemic, it impacted everything. And right now, I know you don't get too much into astrology, but your wife does, and I do. But Uranus is in Taurus. The last time that happened 84 years ago was right between the world wars. So it's a time when there's oppression, authoritarianism, like, I don't want to say polarity. So polarization, polarity, interesting, right? It's like if we can get through the polarization and we find the sweet spot, it's polarity. So
Yeah,
that's Tantra right there.
it's
Um,
cool.
yeah, really cool. So it's like this is the opportunity. We have all this polarization. If we can connect, if we can find the connection, we have polarity. And then we have the yin and the yang, the unity, the wholeness, then we transcend. So I'm really interested in this concept. And this is really what Goddess Vibrations is about. It's about Tantra and that philosophy in all the ways that it impacts humanity. Um, and so anyway, world wars. I'll just share a story about my grandpa. He was a very sensitive man. He was a Cancer and very emotional. He went to war as a young man and fought in Japan. And he, on his deathbed, had so much remorse and shared this story and just sadness and tears about the fact that he, was in hand-to-hand combat with bayonets and he had killed a Japanese soldier. And when he kind of turned him over, he realized he was just a young boy, like
Mm-hmm.
maybe 14. And it hurt my grandpa so much. He never really got over that. And he didn't have a way to talk about that. And like you were saying, he's brainwashed, he's forced, he's hypnotized to do this. But in that moment of humanness, it's like that was an incredible trauma for him. But you're told to do that because that's what you're
Right.
doing for your country. And so he comes back, and he and my grandma had 6 children, and the unhealed trauma, the PTSD. I knew him as a moody man. He was really sweet and sensitive, and then he was like rah, like wild. PTSD. I didn't know it at the time, but how that trickled down to the way that he treated my father, and then the way that my father wasn't going to be like that to me, but he chose, self-medication and alcohol to mute that enough and then disappear when he was going through stuff, and then how that impacts me and now my current relationships and the work I've had to do. And when you start to look at all the different layers of your family system, you're like, damn, it was war. Like it wasn't, that was just a global thing. And so how is this pandemic now going to impact all of our lineages after this? If it will, unless we do something right now to really get vulnerable, to really start having these conversations and going into the feelings and feeling, one of my favorite sayings is the only way through is through. Like you have to feel it to heal. You have to address this stuff, but you can do it in a pleasant way, a pleasurable way. This is why, again, I love the work of your mother-in-law, Dr. Chris Northrup, because she's always about pleasure. And when you have those endorphins going, even in meditation, whether it's, meditation or hypnosis or even um, sexual interactions, you're boosting those endorphins, and it does help you calm your nervous system enough to allow the trauma to come up gently rather than having to have these really painful digging through experiences. And I would think that that is something that is appealing to men. If I know most men in the masculine, it's like, oh, we can heal through pleasure. Awesome. When we have sex, we can actually start to unwork trauma and create a safe connection point to heal trauma. Amazing. Like that might be a way to engage, some healing.
Yeah, it might be. I also like the whole conversation around pleasure and sex and all that stuff. I don't think that's the way to do it though, truthfully. I mean, I think that ability's there,
Mhm.
but that's not where we go. Like the way we look at sex and the way that it's portrayed, it's not healing, right? It's about
Well,
dominance a lot of times. So I
porn,
think
that's fast
it
food porn culture.
yeah, so it could be that direction. I think, but you have to do the work outside of, like, you can't do that with someone else, right? You have to start with ourselves. We have to start making a change, and so we have to decide, like, I don't want to live this way anymore, and how do I do it? I know one of the big things that happened after George Floyd was murdered, which is a lot of conversation around, like, what do I do now? Right? Like, what do I do? Or the Me Too came out, all that's, in those couple of months when everybody was being called out in the celebrity status. And it's like, oh my God, I don't want to talk, and you even heard it's like, you're like, what do I do? What do I do? You freeze, right? You get to this place of frozen instead of, and so we have to like look at our stuff. We have to look at like, what have I done? What have I caused damage? What have I done? Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of way to, but I think it just comes us looking in the mirror and realizing like, I don't want to live my life this way anymore. And I don't want to carry on the damage that, let's say, my father did or my grandfather, and we can make choices to do that and show up in the world a little bit different. But that, it starts with us before we can go, starts with me looking in the mirror at myself more so than thinking as the whole collective whole. Cause that's overwhelming. When I like look at, if I think back to the Me Too era and be like, okay, we have to help every man in that way, like that's not possible. It's super overwhelming.
No.
And so it's like, okay, I can affect, what's the best way not to pass negative things from like what happened with my father down to my kids and me showing up as a dad. um yeah, and still hold yourself as this kind of alpha male, I guess you could say, because that's what we take take that's what a lot is translated into us.
Yeah.
And so it's like, how do I find myself and still be my alpha while also having some beta feelings and bringing these out into the world? Like, it's, it's the yin and yang aspect you talked about. So yeah.
Well, my friend Golden, who was actually on this podcast recently, she calls herself a life midwife. She's very spiritual and tapped into all this stuff, but she says a true alpha male. Like, when you say an alpha male with some beta feelings, that's what she would call a true alpha, like an
Oh,
actual
cool.
salt of the earth, grounded alpha male. And I think that is maybe the place that we need more of that in the world. So I just think there's a lot of confusion, even with you saying like, we need to take personal responsibility. 100%, 1000%, I agree with you. And I feel like it's awareness of the systemic dynamics, but not feeling powerless within that. And you said something else earlier that made me think like, what you're really talking about is sovereignty. It's the sovereignty conversation, and it hits every area right now of our
Mm.
lives, from medical freedoms to sexual sovereignty to reproductive rights sovereignty to sovereignty in like, I had all of these things against me, even my DNA has shifted because of these things that my ancestors went through, but we know about epigenetics that I have 95 to 99% control over changing that, and
Mm-hmm.
and flipping it for my generation. And this is the beautiful thing with systems theory, which is so much of my background in both of my graduate degrees. It's the individual does impact the whole. It only
Yep.
takes one. So you're talking about your partnerships, your partnership in your podcast, your partnership in your marriage. It only takes one person to change and to do something differently, to send out ripples that will impact your whole family. Even not only your nuclear family, but your parents, your
Mm-hmm.
extended family. I've done that. I've been doing that work for decades in my family, and I don't have much family drama the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years.
That's
Really,
awesome.
yeah. I mean, I'm now something will happen, right? But so saying that, it's like, oh shoot. But the work works, and you do
Yep.
take that personal responsibility. And I think that sovereignty conversation is so important. It has to happen for healing, because otherwise we're in this codependent loop where, like you said, we're going to change the whole world, or we're going to change men. And also you're saying, as a man, it's your job to help heal men, right? And I think of that as like, all the women who might be jaded, it's usually just a small handful of men doing the dirtiest things that are, hurting all the women, like dating all the women. I think that most men want love. They're very compassionate. They're wanting, a nurturing connection. But these behaviors sometimes impact the whole more than they could, because like one person doing the work, and it also can happen with one person doing the most. Like a narcissist in a system is going to poison, the whole system, until people start to learn boundaries and to cut off that energy that they're they're taking. So I don't know. I think it's an interesting conversation with systems and sovereignty. And I know I'm going to have Dr. Mario Martinez, like I mentioned, coming on next month. And that's he and I have talked about that before too, this sovereignty conversation and how it impacts systems.
Cool. That's awesome.
So if you're a man doing the work, being aware of your vulnerability, what does that look like day to day? Because you said the one thing that stuck out for me is you said the healing happens individually. It's our individual work, but even going back to the work of Esther Perel, which I so resonate with, she's saying individual healing is one thing and relational healing is a whole other thing. And I think as a society, most people are just starting to awaken to that individual healing piece. Most people aren't really understanding how to heal relationally. But when we get there, and
By that, do you mean like between two people or between the world? What do you mean by relational healing?
Between two people or like within a group. So it could be between, a romantic couple. It could be between maybe groups of certain ideologies. That sort of thing. But when we learn how to heal, to be in a somewhat at least healed space, I don't think the healing's ever fully done, but be somewhat in a healed space enough to meet another person and start to do that healing. Of course, it's all happening simultaneously too. We can't like compartmentalize these things, but what are your thoughts on that as far as like what does the day-to-day look like for a man maybe who's doing the individual healing or trying to be more vulnerable?
Well, I think for me, what I do is basically just notice what's happening throughout the day. So one is how much programming we are actually built with. It's like I moved to Miami, right? So what do we think about Miami, right? Like what's things that happen in Miami? It's Miami Vice, it's the cars, it's the boats, it's the like the Colombians with the cocaine coming in here, right? It's like all of this is programmed from where? From movies, from TV, from the CIA, right? They all tell us these things, right? So it's like it all comes in these different directions. So when I walk around Miami, I'd be like, okay, they're cocaine dealers, right? Like I see these houses, but it's like, where's that from, right? So it's like these type of thoughts that I've been programmed with. I just think about that a lot. And so it helps me is like recognizing like how ridiculous it is. Like I'm sure there's cocaine dealers someplace down here, but they're not every house that I walk past, right? So it's in how that like I used to watch 24 all the time, right? And what was 24? It was like all the Muslims were terrorists, right? So it's like you think about how this programming exists that I have taken in from music to movies to TV. So I think for myself, and then it's like, that's one thing, recognizing my beliefs and thoughts and like, is that true? Or is this coming from somebody else? And then it's also being able to take criticism and feedback from other people. So setting it up from that standpoint. And then it's like, how do I actually want to associate or be around other people? Right. And so we get stuck in these bubbles where we think other groups of people are a problem. Even the situation we're in now, like since the beginning of 2020, we have been told that being around other humans is a bad idea. Like we are pushed away from relating to other human beings. And it's like, if you don't take this medicine, you're not helping the collective. Right. And it's like, what the hell? Like, what is happening? Right. So it's like, it's a very complicated thing because I'm out to dinner the other night and like all this narrative of like, we have to wear masks to protect other people. People are smoking 8 feet away from me still, right? Like down here in Miami, right? It's like a wild, wild west out here. But like they're smoking 8 feet away from me. And I would just laugh. I'm like, this is hilarious. And then I think about how stupid we are as humans, because I go into restaurants and it's like, wash your hands for 20 seconds. Like this is where we are in the level of relationships to each other. Like that is going to solve the world's issues. And it's like, no, like this is where I'm like, wow. So you think about how we're supposed to, and then you go to New York, they live a different narrative than we are living in Miami. You go to California, California is on a whole different planet, right? You go to I was just in Montana, you go to Montana, it's a whole different ballgame, right? You go, so there's even in the United States, you go to these different pockets, we are relating to humans at a different level, right? And so we put people into these boxes and we're programming to be like, stay away from everyone because you're going to kill everybody, right? In this way. And it's like, that's just pushing each other farther apart. I want to be closer. I want to be up. Like if I'm sick and I have a cold, I'm going to stay at home, right? I'm going to like chill out. I'm not going to come up on your business, but it's like, I want to connect because we're energetic beings living on this planet, right? So we resonate with other humans. And if the more we can get in contact with other human beings, the more we can be around people, the more healing that's going to take place. But I have to recognize, oh, you know what? Like I did this thing when I was in 7th grade to this girl that maybe wasn't the best thing. Maybe she feels uncomfortable about it. Maybe I still follow her worst of friends on Facebook. I could reach out to be like, hey, this came to me the other day and I probably didn't treat you the best. And I'm really sorry about that. You know, as a 39-year-old man, like I can go heal these relationships. And so there was a couple of things with me too was going on. There was a couple of women in my life that resonated that I thought about during this time. And I reached out to them and they said, listen, it's not a big deal. It's fine. You know, things that went down, like it's not a big deal, Mike. You don't have to think about this anymore. Right. And so I just reached out to them, apologized. And it ended up not being that big of a deal because they didn't think it was a big deal for me, but it was something I thought about. So it's just reconnecting those individual harms that we might have done. And there's so much of my life that I was drunk or, you know, doing drugs that I don't remember. So there's a lot of things that I could have impacted somebody's life in a negative manner, but like, I don't remember. I have no clue, you know? And so that if that comes to me when I'm like 55 years old, well, I'll deal with it then, you know? But I think there's a place where we want to, as humans, I feel like we want to hang out with other humans for the most part. You know, some of us, I talk to some people that staying in their house for the last year, the best thing I've ever done. Right. And I think it's great, you know, do what you want to do, but don't take away the freedom from someone else, you know? And like we as humans, we talk about freedom and it's the most valuable thing, but like, no matter where you are on the spectrum, we're probably doing something to limit someone else's freedom. So whether that's in a business environment, whether that's from a medical procedure that somebody doesn't want to get done, whether that is in a, you know, a fitness facility, I don't know, like the names are endless. Whether you believe one mandate shouldn't exist, but you're going to take away the rights of women, like it's bananas, like it's so ridiculous, right? And so I think as we are moving as a collective going forward, because that's what's happening in the world, right? That's what is happening. We are collapsing every system that's ever existed up to this point. It's happening because of the internet. It's happening because of cryptocurrencies. It's happening of the decentralization of government. Government is holding on. They are like, I feel like if we can get through as humans, like through this whole, like we are at a place that these walls will fall down. Yeah. And we have to keep pushing up against them because the freedom and the ability for everyone to have some sort of equal playing field is there. And we're at a place right now that this is being shown to us. I think crypto is the perfect example. I've been wildly obsessed with crypto for the last like 2 to 3 weeks. And I fully am finally understanding what's happening with it. And it's probably one of the most important things that are ever going to roll out in my entire life because it levels the playing field. It is citizens engaging with citizens and having them, it's allowing that aspect of a decentralized place to the walls fall down. And I think those type of things that's where we're moving. It is going to be a rocky road to get there, which we're experiencing right now. And it will continue for years to come. And so it's almost like 2021, 2020 it's like building stamina really since 2014, 2015, since that presidential election was taking place. And then it's building stamina for what we're going to deal with, you know? And I think that's the place where we are moving in a way that it's along these paths. Like if you take George Floyd's murder, the Sandra Bland, like all of these issues that have taken place. It's the border issues that we've had here in the United States, like the abuse at the border. And you could just pick, we can talk about that we could list issues every minute for the next 75 hours, but just like pick each one. It's a small stepping stone of bringing humanity closer together to recognize like, that's not right. That's not right. That's not right. That's not right. And recognizing that we are in charge of fixing it, right? And having the world be a better place. And I feel like the old beliefs and systems people will die, and those beliefs and systems will die with them, right? And some will try to hold on to them as long as possible, but it won't last, right? It's not going to last, because where humanity, I believe, is going as for the collective of everyone. But we don't know what that looks like because we've never lived it, right? And I think it's never been in existence. So we're creating something that's new.
Yeah.
And I think as dudes, we have to show up in a way that is embodying, like, if we just talk masculine, feminine energy aspect, like having a balance of both as we navigate these waters, and really holding true to what we believe in, but as long as it is for everyone, but also recognizing what our strengths and weaknesses are and where we need help and where we need assistance. Yeah. So I feel like that's the place of we can use it as individualization, or individuals to the collective. Because like, you give money to women, they think about the collective. They think about the kids. They think about the neighborhood. They're going to keep the unit together, and they're going to keep the unit thriving. You give money to men, they like spend it on themselves to buy a new car, right? So I feel like that's what's being fixed. It's like thinking about the collective first before our individual selves. And yeah, so.
Well, I mean, I so appreciate everything you said. I totally makes sense. The shift, the awareness. I do tend to believe that most of the overt, whatever you want to call it, oppression or conservatism, or the old way of doing things, is gonna die when those folks die, but it's still subtly passed down still.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so I like what you're saying about the constant awareness and the self-awareness. And I think one of the problems is, even with the Me Too movement, and you said you're trying to make amends, I actually went back and I was like, when was I embracing toxic masculinity, and saying like, be a man to like my partner or whatever. And I
Yep.
remember calling an ex and being like, I am so sorry, because he was a very
Yeah.
sensitive man. And I'm like, I did that to you. I was like, told you be a man when we were breaking up, and be a man and all this stuff, and you were vomiting. Like, he was so upset, he's vomiting. And I'm like, I feel so bad. He's like, honestly, I don't even remember that. I'm like, oh, I'm so glad. I've been like feeling guilty about it, right? But so I can, as a woman, I can identify also with what you're saying, because it feels like about 95% of the world is like a masculine world. It's built for a man. And even being an athlete, you talked about coaches. I played 3 sports, and I was taught to ignore my pain, just wrap it up, take some
Yep.
ibuprofen, get back in the game, icy hot. You're going to win the game, and then we're going to deal with it. And to this day, I have issues with my knees, because for years and years and years, I'm not attending to what my body was screaming at me. And so I so appreciate the work of Kate. Like, Kate is really, for everything from her day planner to everything that she's putting out, is she's bringing that more feminine intelligence and awareness to it in such a beautiful way, which doesn't feel like in your face, like men or women trying to get power by being more masculine, right? And it's women stepping into their powers, being more feminine. And when they do that, I feel like they can invite men to bring that balance also back in. And maybe one day we'll
Yeah.
have a world that's more 50-50.
That's hard though, because women have become more masculine, but then they're called names, right? Trying to fit into environments. And I think what Kate's figuring out is that she can be in her masculine, but also lead with her feminine in this way. And she's not trying to do it for anybody else except for she just listened to her body. It's kind of remarkable, like being around her. She taught me a lot from just like that ability to listen to whoever you call your inner guidance or inner voice or God or whatever you have your name for that. And that's been the biggest learning for me to watch, and I think with the birth of both of our kids, but when she was in labor with Penelope, it was like, I was like, what the hell is going on? Like, it was the most craziest thing birth is the most insane thing I'll ever see in this entire planet. It is bizarre, right? It's like, as a dude, I'm sitting there and the midwife's just like, okay, Kate's like in contractions. And I'm like, is this okay? Baby should be, it sounds like baby's coming out, like I have no clue. She's like, well, not really. She's only like 5 centimeters dilated. And I was like, what, another hour or so? And she's like, well, it could be like 6 or 7 or 3, like a day, who knows? Right. And I'm like, what? Like, she's going to do this for a day? Like, what? Right. And so I feel like watching that take place, and because when she was in labor, she was so inward. I was just there to hold a beverage and see if she said yes or no, and I was like, okay, cool. I'm like, all right. So she's not pressuring situations to come out. She's just like taking the uncomfortable feelings and pushing them through her, like breathing through it. Right. And it was remarkable. And the midwives were just like, I've never in 30 years, I don't think I've seen somebody labor like that in 30 years. And I was like, really? And they were like, yeah, what she did was phenomenal. And I was like, wow, okay. But it's been the biggest lesson for me is to it's like to get out of my head and get back in my body. And I feel like as dudes, we're so much in our head, and the more and more we get back into our heart, and the more and more we get back into our body, like it'll lead to great things. But it's also, as you said, like our partners, if they're women, have to be able to handle it, right? Because they can't handle, because you have, since I'm talking to you, you have a narrative of what a guy or man is supposed to be, right? So if you're with a partner that doesn't meet that narrative, which is what happened in our dynamic a lot, where you think there's something wrong with that guy, or like as Kate thought about what's going on with Mike, what's happening here? This is unsafe. I feel like all my spidey senses of unsafety come up. And so I think it's, as we're adjusting it, it also falls on relationships and partners to recognize, because she had to recognize that herself. We went to therapy to talk it out, and it allowed me to be like, okay, I can express this. She can handle this now, right? Or whatever, vice versa. So I think it's not just like, it's, yes, my job as well, but also to recognize like where I want to go. And as I guide my path there, Kate will either come along or she'll resist it or push up against it. And same for both of us, right? But then we have to work through those things as well. Yeah.
100%. That's the work. That's the process. That's also the sovereignty conversation.
Yeah.
So what you're experiencing in your romantic partnership is also what society is experiencing, as one idea is innovative and new and authentic and really aligned with truth, there's going to be resistance, and people are going to come or they're going to reject, and we're seeing all of that messiness right now for sure.
It's amazing, right?
Yeah,
it's kind of cool.
It is kind of cool, and we are creating new romantic relationships now. My last couple podcast episodes have been on that, and even examining the difference between polyamory and monogamy, and how it's not necessarily the structure of the relationship, but how authentic you are, and everybody's needs being met.
Yep.
The energy and within the dynamic, and that's really what it's about, it seems. And even the institution of marriage started as ownership of women. And so when we think about that, to your point of like those institutions die with those people, there's still times where there's very unconscious patriarchy that comes up. I've noticed it as a woman, and every single one of my male partners has been like some very subtle patriarchal stuff that has come up that I'll point out. Like I'm sure you're saying, Kate might point out some things for you and you're pointing out things for her, but I'll point out, and in the perfect world, which has happened, they're like, oh, wow, I wasn't aware of that. You're right. Let me think about that. How did my thought process not match the behavior? So it's this constant process of unworking this subconscious stuff from these societal influences. So as we keep doing that, relationship structures might change. This is my own personal choice for various reasons, but I really don't feel called to enter back into a legal marriage, because I don't like the idea of the state or any government entity governing my romance,
Yep.
my romantic relationship. But also, as you two are, I'm also a business person. So there's certain contracts and legalities involved with, those sorts of partnerships. So is that any different? I don't, yes and no. Um, Lots of different things to consider, but how can we separate from those oppressive um, dynamics of even a love relationship and really recreate it into something different that is more, I don't know if equal is the right word, but like the balance between security and freedom, the safety.
Right. Yeah. I think equal is the right word. There's no such thing as equal, right?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's like
So
we're striving for some imaginary thing that's not it. You're going to have an advantage over me in some things, and I'm going to have an advantage over you in some things,
yeah. Yeah.
depending on what it is, right?
And maybe that is the equality. It's the complementarity.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so the last episode that I did with Shofar Graves, he's really interesting. He does something called Central Emotional Exchange, SEX. Is his acronym, but because he capitalizes the X in exchange. But he says that all this tension in the world is like building up to an orgasm, right? It's like this tension. That's how an orgasm works. It's like you're building up this tension, and then pretty soon it explodes into this bliss. And so he's hoping that for society. So being a tantra person and an energy worker, he really does use pleasure and orgasm for healing and helps his clients do that. But as you said earlier, it's not just sex. It's like it has to be true intimacy, like true presence, true
Yeah.
liveness. And what we were talking about, integrity in relationships. And what is it? If I look at the dictionary definition of integrity, it's wholeness. And so what does wholeness mean? Wholeness might mean sometimes, Mike, you're doing 70% of something and I'm doing 30%, but that's wholeness. But in another area, I'm doing 70% and you're doing 30%. That's wholeness. That's the integrity, the structure, the relationship is in integrity. That's one thing. But also I like to use that definition of saying in every moment, your conversation that you'll have with your children when they come home, maybe they're already home, and your wife, is this conversation contributing to more wholeness in my relationship?
Mhm.
Is this conversation contributing to more wholeness in myself? So am I showing up in wholeness and integrity, and I'm being truthful about what my needs are, my desires, what's going on for me, my emotions? And as I understand that, how am I communicating that to my relationship, again, whether it's romantic, business, family, whatever, so that I can preserve and continue the wholeness, because that's how we evolve and transform together. So these are just some ideas and concepts I've been playing with. And I don't want to keep you much longer because I know you have your family to get back to. And I'm so appreciative of you coming on today and just opening up these ideas, really valid points and things to think about, and things that maybe some people haven't really articulated or shared. And I feel like when somebody can articulate things well, when you have that gift, Kate has that gift, it can help people say, yes, that's what I've been feeling. I just didn't know how to say it. So I really appreciate your words and sharing
Cool.
your
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This was fun.
yeah, good. Well, you're always welcome back. So if you hit a hot topic on your podcast and you want to come distill it again through the feminine over here.
Yeah, I can always talk. So just hit me up anytime you want to chat. So.
Same. All right. Well, thank you very much. And I wanted to direct people to your business. I always put my little website on here on the Zoom. Of course, that might be edited out, but how can small business owners get in touch with you to help, improve their systems? I know a lot of small business owners that could use you. So what
Yeah,
would
if you go to Mike J. Watts, that's Mike and then J and then WATTS.com
Mhm,
/consulting.
mhm,
I'm also on Instagram, Mike J. Watts, if you want to chat over there.
mhm.
And there's an application and it explains kind of how I help somebody. And then for the podcast, you could go to thestateofmen.com or
Mhm.
the State of Men on any of your podcast listening platforms. We're there on all of them. So yeah, I'm happy to help any small business owners that need support, and as we transition now, it's like pretty cool place to be, to kind of, a lot's changed in the internet online space and in the world business in the last 5 years.
Mhm.
And so just make sure you're all set up for that so you can focus on really what you want to be doing instead of like sending out emails all the time, stuff like that.
Right. And I would say, I'll just say, you met with me several years ago now. I don't remember exactly when it was, and just gave me a little, some pointers about my business as I was starting to streamline my systems. And it was really valuable because you said, you pretty much have everything you need. Like we're right now trying to simplify. It's just like, how can you simplify? But I think as new business owners, we're just like, oh, we have to be having all the fancy bells and whistles, and I don't have this. And it's just, you're somebody that has experience running a pretty, profitable business, and all of the things that it takes in all the different areas, especially in the online space, which is of course more popular now after the pandemic. So
Hmm.
I just wanted to give you that little shout out and say
Cool. Thank you.
thank you for that. And
That's awesome.
anybody, I think that you can really help a lot of people, again, with your logic, your experience. And I don't ever recommend people that I don't have a
Experience with.
familiarity with their work or experience with. So I can endorse what you're doing from
Great. Thank you.
that perspective.
That
Yeah.
was great. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much. I hope to see you again. Give your girls little kisses. I'm a little jealous of Miami. I think Florida's been calling me. If I end up over there, maybe I'll hit you guys up sometime.
Definitely. Yeah, we're here. Come on over to the wildness of Miami, because it is crazy.
Yeah. All right. Enjoy. Thanks again, Mike.